So let's bring Michael Kaskey-Blomain into Inside the Sixers and get his take on that last night. And he joins me now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline as the Sixers lose that game last night, Michael. And, I think you said in your tweet this morning that you rewatched that game last night. I thought defensively, without Ben Simmons, you really saw a struggle, and Curry just absolutely blitzed him. But what did Golden State do that maybe other teams can emulate?
Yeah, I think the main thing was they were really effective guarding Joel. Obviously it was a thing that teams have been doing throughout the course of the season, but I think last night, especially in the fourth quarter, they did a really good job at sending doubles at him from different directions. Sometimes they would bring a guy up from the baseline over his right shoulder. Sometimes it was coming from the top of the key. And after the game, he said that he probably could have done a better job of positioning himself in the post up. Maybe he could have worked from the foul line extended area a little bit more as opposed to the low post, because he said when he, positions himself higher up in the paint, he has a better view of the entire floor. And he said that Golden State did a pretty good job of, limiting his view and limiting, what he was able to see from his position in the post. But overall, I thought that it was really just a matter of, they did their best to take Joel away on the offensive end. And after that, they made other guys step up. And the Sixers, without Ben, without Tobias, like you just said, they just didn't have, the firepower to keep up with Golden State, especially when on the other side of the floor, you got a guy that's, basically throwing fireballs in Steph Curry every time he was touching the ball.
Now, did you think Embiid got kind of caught up in that late in that game?
Yeah, to an extent, I did, Mike. I thought that he was trying to do like a little bit too much, that he kind of was trying to maybe keep pace with Steph to keep the Sixers in it. But ultimately, I don't put that one on Joel. I think he did, pretty much all that he could. The defense was obviously geared to, take the ball out of his hands. And overall, I think he finished with 6 assists. He had some really nice passes, a couple nice, drop down looks to Matisse for easy baskets in the paint. So I thought Joel's performance overall was pretty promising in terms of the way he handled the double team. He handled a lot of the pressure. I think the main thing for me was just that, you see obviously without Tobias, who's become such a huge secondary option for them on offense, and without Ben, collapsing the defense and initiating some looks for some of their shooters, it was just really hard for them to generate offense, especially in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, no, and I'm not like knocking, but I felt like late in there, I think Curry hit 3 30-foot threes in like the last 2.5 minutes of the game, and Simmons, not Simmons, Embiid got a little, like he had the walk, he had the bad outlet pass. He just, I feel like was rushing and trying to do too much because like Curry's hitting these threes. Well, I got to do something. We don't really have the firepower, so I'll try. And he, I thought late he got caught up a little bit, but for the most part, you didn't have enough offense last night. I mean,
that's what it came down to for me. You just didn't
enough.
Have enough to keep up with the Warriors.
Right, yeah. There's not enough offensive options. Shake Milton struggled last night. Yeah, he was pretty tough. He hit that 3 late in the game. It was like a finally feel. But you tweeted about Tolliver. Doesn't look like they really have a lot there. So I guess the question goes back to, do they have enough depth for you again when you look at this playoff rotation? What are they going to do, about 8, 9 guys here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Mike, I think there's a chance that they go up to 11 deep. Not necessarily, not in the same game. I'm not saying that, but I think their postseason rotation will really depend a lot on matchups. Like, I think in certain situations, you'll see Matisse get a lot of those forward minutes off the bench. If you're facing a team like Brooklyn, obviously, for example, or another team that has, multiple perimeter guys that they need to lock down. And then in certain situations, I think you'll see Furkan get some of those minutes when they need the spacing and some additional offense around Joel and Ben. I think Doc has been, he's praised Furkan throughout the season. He's been pretty happy with what he's brought. So for me, I do think they have enough depth. Granted, as long as all of their guys are healthy. I think if they had either Ben or Tobias in that game last night, they walk away with a W. I think they would have had enough on the offensive end, even with Curry going, ballistic and dropping 49. So I think if all the guys are healthy, they have all the pieces there, and I think they're deep enough that they can contend with some of these other teams that also have a pretty deep bench.
George Hill got his first minutes last night. I mean, he obviously looked like a guy who hasn't played since January 24th. But moving forward, does he get more minutes? Is that his role? What do you see from Hill?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he pretty much has a role carved out for himself already, being that, backup point guard, backup playmaker coming off the bench. I think it'll take the ball out of Shake's hands a little bit. And, like we were just saying, based off the way he's been playing recently, that's not a bad thing. There will definitely still be a role for Shake in the postseason. He's been, their sixth man for the majority of the season. He's a guy that can come in and give them instant offense. And that's something that Doc has used, throughout his career. When you go back, obviously Lou Will, Jamal Crawford, guys that can just come in and he can give him the ball and say, hey, go get us a couple buckets. We're struggling right now. I think that's going to continue, but George Hill is more of a guy that can, come in and execute an offense, execute a game plan. And I think you saw that last night. He obviously was rusty. He had limited impact, but he looked, the IQ's there. You can see what he's reading the floor. He makes smart plays on both ends of the floor. So I think he's a guy, and given the experience that he has too, Doc's been really high on, in terms of what he brings to the team in playoff experience. So I think that there's definitely a role, for him in the postseason, probably sixth, seventh man, one of the first off the bench.
Well, and it shows you how short you were last night. You had Hill guarding Curry in the last couple minutes of that game last night, and that didn't go well.
Which made no sense to me. I don't understand why he went with Seth and Hill for basically the whole fourth quarter instead of putting Matisse or Danny on Steph. And, if you're not going to double him, you're not going to trap him, you would at least think that you'd want to have one of your better, longer defenders on him to make things, more difficult than they were.
Yeah, and I mean, Matisse played 31 minutes last night, so it was like he was in the game and a big part of the game. I was a little confused as to why he didn't get that call. I mean, they got one guy blitzing you last night, and your best perimeter defender was not called on. I thought that was a little bit. Did Doc? I mean, he kind of acknowledged that we didn't do a great job on him.
Yeah, he said it after the game that obviously it was a throwaway comment. He said that he thought that the team could have done a better job.
Right.
On Steph, which is, the understatement of the century. Their defense on him was, extremely basic. It was, a pick and roll coverage, and they would have Joel drop back. And there was, like you said, in the last 5 minutes of the game, I think Steph had 4 threes, and he made them look, all very easy. Doc did say after the game that he didn't want to have Joel press up any further on Steph in that situation, which, I thought was a little bit interesting. Obviously, he said, if you press Joel up further, you run the risk of Steph, blowing right past them and going in for a layup. But at that point, that's what your help defense is for. And if the guy's already shredding you from beyond the arc for 49 points, to me, you would at least want to switch it up and do something. So, to me, I did think it was a little bit of a head scratcher the way they decided to cover Steph down the stretch of that game. But hopefully, it's a situation where you live and you learn, and they would probably adjust moving forward.
What is your take and reasoning why Maxey doesn't get ready? I mean, he feels like the one guy who can put the ball on the floor, create, score a bucket, twist and turn, finish. Why he has kind of not found his way to get regular minutes?
Doc's certainly not the first coach to kind of, hold back on giving rookies major roles, especially on a championship team. That's something that, Doug Collins was real big on that. He didn't like playing guys. Brett Brown to an extent. And I think there's kind of a level there where you have this team that's, established, a veteran team. And while Maxey does bring a different dynamic that they don't have, I think the inexperience there is part of it. And, there was some inconsistent play throughout the course of the year. He still has a way to go on the defensive end, some of the decision-making. But when he's playing well, like last night, it's a lot easier to ask that question. He came in and made an immediate impact and an immediate difference in that game, especially when Shake wasn't playing well. So to me, I think this year he's kind of like the wild card that Doc likes to keep in his back pocket. He doesn't have a rotational role. I don't think he will in the postseason either. I don't think he's a guy that's going to get, consistent minutes night in, night out. But in certain situations where they just need a spark, I think at this point, that's kind of his role on this team, and that's how he'll be viewed. Next season, that could change. Obviously, he'll have a little more experience under his belt. But I think it's just a matter of, lack of experience, some inconsistent play, and, other options that Doc also, likes on this team.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain inside the Sixers from CBS Sports. Covers the NBA, covers the Sixers. Now, Doc said before the game, correct, that not a lot of concern about Tobias Harris and that knee.
Yeah, he basically brushed it off. He talked about how much Tobias has played this season. He's barely missed, any games. And we're at that point of the season now, Mike, as obviously a lot of these teams are, they're going to try to get some rest games in for their players, especially a team like the Sixers that hope to play for, 3 more months at this point, the rest of this season, and then 2 months of the playoffs. So there's no concern with Tobias long-term. Obviously, no concern with Ben long-term, who's dealing with a non-COVID illness. They should, if not back by tomorrow night against the Suns, I would expect both of them back in the lineup for the 2 games against Milwaukee coming up this weekend.
All right, MKB, you cover the Sixers, you go to most of the games, but you also cover the league in general. So you're looking at this East, the top 6, the way some of these teams are playing. Atlanta's won 8 of 10, Boston 8 of 10. New York's won 6 in a row, 7 out of 10. Any of those teams in the middle starting to catch your attention at all?
Absolutely. I mean, not in terms of a team that I think could give the Nets or the Sixers, a real run for their money in the conference. But, some of those teams, like you said, the Hawks, the Knicks are up and coming. To me, the 2 teams that would, worry me a little bit in terms of the Sixers are the teams that have been established. The Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat. Teams that both had really underwhelming campaigns so far on the season, but they're also teams that have, the experience together. They very similar lineups to the rosters that they had last season when both teams were in the conference finals. Both teams had a lot of talent. They didn't live up to their potential so far this season for, whatever reason, COVID, injuries, things like that, inconsistent play. But if I'm the Sixers, if I'm working all season to get that first seed in the Eastern Conference, and I get it. I don't want to necessarily see a Boston Celtics team with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, or a Miami Heat team with, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo in that first round. The other teams could make it an interesting thing, but I think, the Knicks, the Hawks, the Hornets, I think ultimately the Sixers would be able to take care of, any of those teams.
Yeah, right now those 3 teams, that Atlanta, Boston, New York, they are playing some of the best basketball, definitely in the Eastern Conference, but some of the best in basketball. There's some teams out west, by the way, that are playing pretty good. Phoenix has been fantastic. They play Philly tomorrow. The Clippers have won 8 of 10. Denver's won 8 out of 10. So it's interesting coming down the stretch. What is your thoughts on this playing game? I know Doc said he really liked it. He said that during the radio broadcast last night. He was on between one of the commercial breaks with McGinnis. He says he really likes it. I know there's been a lot of mixed reviews.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how he felt about it if the Sixers weren't in the 1 seed. It's easier to say you really like it when you don't have to worry about it. And if anything for them, it's a bonus for the Sixers because their first round matchup is probably going to have to play an extra game or 2 before the season even starts to kind of figure out that,
right,
how that's going to shake out. I think as a fan, from a fan perspective, it definitely adds a level of intrigue because at this point in the season, like we were kind of just touching on, this is where, you see a lot of rest coming in without the play-in. Things are kind of set already. You have the teams that, know they don't have a chance. You have the teams that have established themselves at the top usually. And then that leads to some mediocre ball down the stretch. I think that the idea behind it is that it makes this last month a little bit more competitive as teams are still alive. So, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But for me, as just from a fan perspective, I'm excited about it. And I think it could be something that ends up catching on.
Yeah, to me, because I was like looking at the schedule coming up, and you're thinking, down the stretch, the schedule lightens up. However, you got a game next week where you're playing Chicago. Well, they were way out of it, except for now they're in this play-in situation. So that game against the Bulls, they're playing for something, where in years past, right, they're not really playing for something. Now, the other flip side of it is we know in the NBA, some teams don't want to win at this part of the season. If you're Chicago, do you want to get in the play-in tournament, or would you rather lose games?
Right. I mean, that's the question that a lot of these teams will have to decide, but at least there's that option. Like you said before the play-in, if a team was in the 10 seed at this part in the season, it's pretty much you throw in the towel, you're going to the lottery, play some of the younger guys. But at this point, if you had maybe a season where you had a lot of injuries early on, or you made a trade,
right,
or, you switched a coach in the middle of the season, like the Hawks case, and you start playing much better under a new coach, it gives you the confidence that, hey, maybe we can make a run on this back end. So, I mean, it's going to be a team by team basis in terms of how they approach it. But for a game like that, it gives a team that otherwise wouldn't have had any reason or, anything to play for. And now there's some, real motivation there.
All right. Michael Kaskey, now, do you vote for MVP? Do you have a vote yet?
Not yet. I'm working on it.
All right.
Hopefully.
You're getting there. Are you voting for Joel Embiid or Jokic or somebody else? Is there somebody I'm missing? I know Curry's starting to try to get his name in that mix too. It's hard for a team that's the 9 seed right now, but if you had your vote, who's your guy?
If it ended right now, if this was the end of the season, I think you would have to go with Jokic, based off consistency, level of play all season, and the fact just the durability. Not missing any games, putting up crazy numbers. The Nuggets are, still right in the thick of that playoff picture, and they're only, they're fifth in the standings, or fourth, I believe, in the West, but they're only a couple games behind the Sixers record wise. And
They're
Jokic
fourth out
been,
west, 37-20, and they've hung in there without Murray. I'll give them that.
and that's the thing. If they can continue to do
I
that,
agree.
then he has a great case for himself. But to me, if Joel doesn't miss more games for the rest of the year, maybe a game or two, but if he can play most of the rest of the games and continues to dominate, I think he can climb right back in that conversation and at least make it a real race by the end of the year.
Well, last night was one of they're 30-9, I think, without Joel, and 9-9 with him, or something.
That sounds right.
Something into that. So it shows when he doesn't play, they're a 500 team, and with him, they win 79% of the time. So I think that's a good thing. But you have this whole he didn't play enough games, but some of those games he didn't play because of COVID protocols, which was kind of out of his hands. So that's a little wonky. So we'll see. I think that's going to be an interesting conversation this last 10 games or so. The NBA playoffs beginning in about a month from now. Michael Kaskey-Blomain will be here on Tuesdays for Inside the Sixers here on the Sports Bash. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. MKB, good. Glad we're doing this, man.
Yeah, me too, Mike. Looking forward to it for the rest of the season.